The scanner pinged once, twice, then screamed. A sound Captain Elias Vorne hadn't heard since that time he'd accidentally flown too close to a collapsing neutron star and nearly turned his ship into cosmic confetti. He bolted upright in his pilot's seat, heart hammering, as the view screen flickered to life. There it was, a jagged, impossible thing clawing its way out of the darkness near the event horizon of a black hole. The Eternal Core, they called it in whispers, a relic of the Dvar, a species so advanced they could bend reality itself, until they didn't, until they vanished. And now, it hung there, shimmering like a mirage, its edges warping the starlight into something that made Elias's stomach twist. He didn't know if it was a treasure trove or a death trap, but one thing was damn sure. Whatever was inside had just locked onto him. A voice, low, sultry, and not even close to human, slithered through the static of his comms. "I've waited eons for you, Fleshwalker." Elias froze, one hand on the throttle, the other itching for his gun. Run? Fight? Pray? Every instinct screamed at him to punch the engines and get the hell out, but that voice, it wasn't just sound. It was a pull, a promise, something that sank into his bones and made his blood hum. He was hooked, and he knew it. And if you're hooked too, if you want to know what happens when a lone spacer steps into a trap woven by a ghost of a lost civilization, stick around. Hit that subscribe button, because trust me, this ride's only getting wilder, and I'm not leaving you behind. Captain Elias Vorne wasn't the kind of guy who chased silence. Silence was for monks, poets, and people who didn't know half the galaxy a small fortune in unpaid bar tabs. No, Elias lived for the hunt, chasing down scraps of dead worlds, piecing together stories from rusted hulks and forgotten ruins. He made a name for himself out here in the post-apocalyptic sprawl of the cosmos, where stars burned out faster than dreams and every shadow hid something with teeth. His ship, the Eclipse Seeker, was his lifeline, a battered patchwork frigate that looked like it had been stitched together by a drunk mechanic, which, to be fair, it mostly had. The hull was scarred from pirate skirmishes, the engines wheezed like an old man on his last cigar, and the plasma cannon strapped to its belly was definitely not standard issue. But it was home, and it was his. He slouched in the pilot's chair, boots propped on the console, a half-empty flask of something suspiciously green dangling from his fingers. His black hair was a mess, too long, too wild, like he'd lost a bet with a barber droid years ago and never recovered. Those sharp green eyes of his flicked to the scanner again, narrowing at the data streaming in about the Eternal Core. "Dvar Tech," he muttered, running a hand over the stubble shadowing his jaw. "Figures. Why's it always got to be the creepy, reality-bending stuff? Why not? I don't know. A derelict freighter full of spiced rum and zero existential dread." The truth was, Elias wasn't just some scavenger with a death wish. He'd been a proper archaeologist once, back when he still believed in grants and universities and a woman named Zyra, who'd promised him forever until a reactor meltdown took her and half his crew in one fiery blink. That was a decade ago. Now, he drifted, chasing ghosts of civilizations to fill the void she'd left behind. The Dvar were his holy grail, a race so brilliant they'd rewritten the laws of physics, only to vanish without a trace. War? Ascension? Bad luck? No one knew. But if the Eternal Core held even a shred of their secrets, Elias was damn well going to find it, even if it killed him. His AI assistant, Nyx, flickered to life on the dashboard, a glowing orb with a voice like a bored bureaucrat. "Captain, I feel obligated to point out that approaching an uncharted Dvar structure orbiting a black hole had a 92% chance of ending in catastrophic failure. Shall I draft your eulogy now, or wait until the inevitable?" Elias smirked, swinging his legs off the console and grabbing his helmet. "Nyx, you're a ray of sunshine, you know that? Note taken, but I'm still going in. If I die, you can have the ship, just don't sell it for scrap." Nyx pulsed an exasperated red. "Noted. I'll mourn you with the dignity you never had." Elias stood, stretching his lean frame, the worn leather of his jacket creaking. He clipped the plasma pistol to his hip and double-checked the seals on his suit. The Eclipse Seeker hummed as it locked onto the Eternal Core's docking port, the clamps groaning like they were as reluctant as Nyx. Elias stepped into the airlock, the hiss of depressurization drowning out the thud of his own heartbeat. He wasn't sure what he'd find, riches, ruin, or something worse. But that voice still echoed in his skull, tugging at him like a siren song. "All right," he muttered, palming the release switch. "Let's see what kind of mess I've got myself into this time." The Eclipse Seeker shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the engines coughing like they'd just run a marathon through a dust storm. Elias leaned forward, squinting at the view screen as the black hole loomed into view, a swirling maw of nothingness that sucked light and hope into its gut. And there, teetering on the edge of its pull, was the eternal core. It wasn't just a structure. It was a damn nightmare made solid, twisted spires of metal and crystal spiraling into each other like some mad architect's fever dream. The whole thing pulsed with a faint, sickly glow, bending the space around it into shapes that hurt to look at. Elias rubbed his eyes. "Okay, that's not normal," he muttered, half expecting the ship to nope out on its own. Data flooded the console. Gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, energy signatures that didn't match anything in the galactic database. "Dvar," he breathed, a grin tugging at his lips despite the cold sweat prickling his neck. This wasn't some rinky-dink outpost. It was a full-on relic, the kind of find that could rewrite history, or end it. He tapped the controls, zooming in on a jagged docking port protruding from the mess of warped alloy. Up close, it looked less like a station and more like a fossilized beast caught mid-snarl as the universe tried to swallow it whole. Nyx's orb flickered brighter, voice dripping with disdain. "Captain, I must reiterate, this object is orbiting a singularity. The odds of survival drop to 73% if you attempt docking, and that's generous." Elias snorted, already plotting the approach vector. 73% is practically a vacation compared to that time I outran those acid-spitting drones on Vecris Prime. "Relax, Nyx. We're golden." The AI pulsed an irritated orange. "Your definition of golden includes scenarios where I inherit a pile of wreckage." Noted. He couldn't argue with the math, though. The black hole's pull tugged at the Eclipse Seeker, making the hull groan like it was begging for mercy. But Elias felt something else. A hum, low and insistent, vibrating through the deck and into his boots. It wasn't just the ship. It was the core, reaching out, whispering in a language he couldn't hear, but damn well felt. That voice from before, "I've waited eons for you," echoed in his head again, and this time, it wasn't static. It was real, and it was close. Elias tightened his grip on the controls, heart pounding. "Screw it," he said, punching the docking sequence. "If I'm gonna die, might as well die curious." The airlock cycled with a hiss that sounded too much like a dying breath for Elias's liking. He stepped out onto the Eternal Core's docking platform, boots clanging against metal so cold it bit through his soles. The place smelled wrong, not of rust or decay, but of something sharp, electric like the air right before a storm cracks open the sky. His helmet's HUD flickered, throwing up static and garbled readings. Temperature fluxing between -50 and boiling, gravity shifting like a drunk dancer, time signatures that flat out didn't make sense. "Great," he muttered, tapping the side of his visor. "Either this place is broken, or I'm about to age backwards and owe myself child support." The corridor stretched ahead, a twisting tunnel of alloy and crystal that looped in ways no sane engineer would design. The walls shimmered, catching the dim beam of his helmet light and tossing it back in fractured rainbows. Every few steps, they pulsed, like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, syncing with the hum he'd felt on the ship. Elias adjusted his grip on the plasma pistol, thumb hovering over the safety. He'd seen his share of weird, sentient slime pits, pirate dens rigged with neurotoxin traps. That one time he'd accidentally married a sentient cloud during a diplomatic mix-up. But this was next level, even for him. Nyx's voice crackled through his comms, distorted by interference. "Captain, I'm detecting energy spikes. Recommend caution, or Abandoning this entirely and letting me fly us to a nice, safe asteroid bar instead. Elias smirked, stepping over a tangle of crystalline tendrils sprouting from the floor. Tempting, but I'm already in too deep. Besides, you just drink all the profits. A long-suffering buzz came through the line. I'm an AI, not a bartender. My suffering is real. He pressed on, the tunnel narrowing until it felt like the walls were closing in, brushing his shoulders with icy fingers. The hum grew louder, thrumming in his chest, and then there it was again. That voice. I feel you, Fleshwalker. Elias spun, pistol raised, beams slicing through the gloom. Nothing, just shadows twisting in the corners, mocking him. Okay, he said aloud, voice echoing off the walls. Either I'm losing it, or someone's playing a really shitty game of hide-and-seek. He lowered the gun a fraction, forcing his breathing to steady. If you're here, show yourself. I'm not big on disembodied flirting. The air thickened, pressing against his suit like a living thing. Then, ahead, the corridor opened into a cavernous chamber, a dome of spiraling crystal panels, glowing with an eerie blue-green light. Symbols danced across them, shifting too fast to read, alive in a way that made his skin crawl. And in the center, she stood, or floated, or existed, because stood didn't quite cut it. Zyra. She was a shimmer of energy, her form flickering between solid and mist, a woman carved from liquid starlight. One moment, she had curves that could stop a fleet. The next, she was a wisp of smoke, eyes too deep and too bright locking onto him. Elias's mouth went dry, and not just from fear. He managed, because apparently his brain had checked out for the day. She tilted her head, a motion so fluid it was hypnotic, and her voice slid into his ears like silk over steel. You're not like the others, are you? Elias swallowed, forcing a grin despite the way his pulse hammered. Depends. The others run screaming, or just shoot first. Her laugh was a low, resonant thing, vibrating through the chamber and straight into his spine. They ran. You linger. He took a step closer. Stupid. Maybe, but he couldn't help it. Up close, she was mesmerizing. Her skin rippled like water under moonlight, and those eyes held something ancient, hungry, and way too knowing. Name's Elias, he said, voice rougher than he meant it to be. And you are what exactly? She drifted nearer, close enough that he swore he felt heat, or was it cold, radiating from her. I am Zyra, she murmured, once Dvar, now this. And you, Elias, are a curiosity I've waited millennia to unravel. Unravel? He chuckled, but it came out shaky. Lady, I'm barely holding myself together as it is. Her gaze sharpened, pinning him like a specimen, and the hum in the room spiked. The floor beneath him shimmered, and before he could blink, a wave of energy surged up his legs, warm and electric, pulling at him in ways he didn't have words for. Wait, he started, but it was too late. The world dissolved, and so did he. Elias didn't scream, not because he was brave, but because his voice had apparently decided to take a vacation the second the floor turned to liquid light beneath him. 1 minute he was standing there, plasma pistol useless in his hand, staring at Zyra's impossible form. The next, his legs were gone, his arms were dissolving, and his whole damn body was unraveling into a million shimmering threads. It wasn't painful. Hell, it didn't even feel wrong. It was warm, tingling, like sinking into a bath laced with static electricity. And through it all, he felt her. Zyra! Her presence wrapped around him. Inside him, a touch that wasn't touch, a whisper that wasn't sound. He tried to say, but his words melted into the air, rippling outward like stones skipped across a pond. He should have been terrified. Any sane person would have been. But instead, there was this pull. Her eyes, those endless, glowing pools, held him, and in them he saw something that made his chest tighten. Curiosity, yes, but also a hunger, deep and ancient, that mirrored something he hadn't let himself feel since Lyra. You're not dying, Zyra's voice came, smooth and intimate, echoing inside his skull and out of it at once. You're opening. Elias would have laughed if he'd had a throat. Opening, he thought, or said, he wasn't sure anymore. Lady, I'm pretty sure I'm a cloud of sparkly dust right now. That's not how I usually open up to people. Her laugh rolled through him, a soft, bell-like sound that danced along the edges of his unraveling self. It wasn't mocking, it was warm, teasing, and it sent a shiver through whatever was left of him. Then the world, or what passed for it in this messed-up chamber, shifted. His memories spilled out like a deck of cards tossed into the void. He saw himself at 16, staring at the red dunes of Mars, dreaming of stars. He saw the first time he kissed Lyra, her lips tasting of engine grease and cheap wine, the heat of her pressed against him in the cramped cockpit of their old ship. He saw her vanish in that blinding flash, the ache that never left. And through it all, Zyra watched, her presence brushing against every moment like fingertips on skin. Stop, he gasped, or thought he did, because this was too much, too raw. But she didn't stop. She stepped closer, or flowed, really, her form shimmering between solid and mist, and the air around him thickened with her. Up close, she was breathtaking in a way that defied words. Her body curved and shifted, now a silhouette of a woman with hips that could have launched 1,000 ships, now a cascade of light that suggested more than it revealed. Elias felt his pulse, or what passed for in this state, kick up a notch. "You're beautiful," he blurted, because apparently his brain-to-mouth filter had dissolved along with his arms. Zyra tilted her head, her lips, or the flickering suggestion of them, curling into something that might have been a smile. "Beauty is a human word," she said, her voice dropping lower, wrapping around him like velvet. "But I feel your regard." She reached out, or seemed to, and a tendril of her light brushed what used to be his chest. It wasn't solid, but it hit him like a jolt, hot and cold at once, electric and maddening. His breath, or the memory of it, caught, and he felt a flush creep up what should have been his neck. "Okay," he managed, "that's new, and not entirely unpleasant." She didn't pull back. If anything, she pressed closer, her form stabilizing just enough to hint at a face, sharp cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, eyes that burned into him. "I see you, Elias Vorne," she murmured, and the way she said his name made it sound like a secret she'd been dying to taste. "Every piece of you. Your joys, your losses, your desires." The last word lingered, heavy with implication, and Elias swore he felt it settle low in his gut, even without a gut to feel it in. He tried to focus, to keep his head straight, but her presence was everywhere, sliding along his thoughts, teasing at edges he'd locked away for years. "Desires, huh?" He shot back, clinging to sarcasm like a lifeline. "Well, you always had a thing for mysterious women who turn me into glitter. Guess you're my type." It was a deflection, but it didn't work. Her light pulsed, and another wave of warmth rolled through him, slower this time, deliberops. //clouds.com/index HTML #T, like she was testing how far she could push him. He saw flashes, Lyra laughing in his arms, the curve of her neck under his lips, the way she'd arch into him. And then something else, something new. Zyra, or the idea of her energy coiling around him, promising something he couldn't name but damn well wanted. "Get out of my head," he said, sharper than he meant, because this was crossing lines he hadn't even known he had. She paused, her form flickering, and for a second, he thought he'd offended her. But then she spoke, soft and steady. "I'm not in your head, Elias. I'm in you, and you're in me." The words hit like a punch, and before he could process them, the chamber spun, or he did, and his body started pulling itself back together. Fingers first, then arms, legs, torso, all snapping into place with a rush that left him staggering, gasping, and way too aware of every nerve in his skin. He hit the floor on one knee, helmet clattering beside him, and looked up. Zyra was still there, hovering just out of reach, her glow dimmed, but no less intense. "You okay?" she asked, and there was something almost human in it, concern, maybe, or amusement. Elias dragged a hand through his sweat-damp hair, grinning despite himself. "Define okay." I just got turned into cosmic soup and lived to tell the tale. So, yeah, I'll take it. He stood, wobbly but upright, and met her gaze. Up close, with his feet back on solid ground, she was even more disarming. Her light played over his face, warm and teasing, and he felt it again. That pull, that heat, like she was daring him to step closer. "You're different now," she said, drifting nearer until he could have sworn he smelled something. Ozone, maybe, or the faint tang of storm. "You feel it, don't you?" Elias flexed his fingers, still tingling from the reassembly. And yeah, he did. The hum of the eternal core wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was in him, syncing with his heartbeat, and she was part of it. He took a step toward her, reckless and stupid, because apparently he hadn't learned a damn thing. "Different how?" he asked, voice low, testing the waters. Her eyes, or whatever they were, flared brighter, and she reached out again, stopping just short of touching him. The air between them crackled, thick with something unspoken. "You're more," she said, and the word hung there, heavy with promise. Elias felt his throat tighten, his gaze dropping to where her hand hovered, inches from his chest. He could have closed the gap. He wanted to. God, did he want to? But something held him back. The memory of Lyra, the life he'd built running from ghosts, the fact that she wasn't human, wasn't anything he could hold. Not really. "More, huh?" he said, stepping back with a crooked grin, breaking the spell before it swallowed him whole. "Well, I was already a lot to handle. Guess I'm officially too much now." Zyra's form flickered, a ripple of light that might have been disappointment, but she didn't push. "You resist," she murmured, almost to herself. "Fascinating." Elias chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, that's me. Fascinatingly stubborn. So what's next, Glowstick? You gonna melt me again? Or can we talk like normal people? Or, whatever you are." Her laugh came again, soft and dangerous, and Elias knew he was in trouble. Not the kind that'd kill him, but the kind that'd haunt him for years. Elias stood there, chest heaving, the cold metal of the eternal core's floor biting into his knees through the suit. His helmet lay discarded a few feet away, its HUD still flickering like it was having a nervous breakdown. He flexed his fingers, marveling at how solid they felt. Too solid, maybe after being scattered into a million pieces of light. The tingling hadn't stopped. It danced under his skin, a restless buzz that synced with the hum of the chamber around him. Zyra hovered nearby, her glow softer now, less blinding, but no less magnetic. She watched him with those impossible eyes, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that she saw more than just the scruffy spacer panting in front of her. "You're different now," she'd said, and damn if she wasn't right. He could feel it, not just the leftover static from whatever cosmic blender she'd tossed him into, but something deeper. The eternal core wasn't just a place anymore. It was alive, its energy threading through him like a second pulse. He closed his eyes, and there it was, a faint map of the structure in his mind. Corridors twisting, crystals pulsing, all of it humming in time with his breath. And her, Zyra, she was there too, a presence at the edge of his thoughts, not intruding but there, like a song he couldn't unhear. "Great," he muttered, pushing himself to his feet. "I've gone from captain to human extension cord. Fantastic upgrade." Zyra drifted closer, her form stabilizing into something almost human, almost but not quite. The curves were there, the suggestion of a body that could have stopped traffic on a dozen planets, but the edges blurred, light bleeding into mist. "You're more than you were," she said, her voice low and steady, carrying that same weight that made his stomach flip. Elias snorted, brushing sweat-damp hair off his forehead. "More? Lady, I was already a mess of bad decisions and questionable charm. What's the next level, galactic disaster?" Her lips, or the shimmering hint of them, twitched, and he swore he saw amusement flicker in her gaze. "You jest," she said, "but you feel it. The connection." He did. God help him, he did. It wasn't just the core or her voice in his head. It was the way the air seemed sharper, the way his senses stretched beyond what they should. He could hear the faint whine of energy coursing through the walls, Smell the ozone tang of her presence. Feel the pull of the black hole outside like a tide against his bones. And Zyra, she was the center of it, a gravity well of her own, tugging at him in ways that went beyond physics. Elias met her eyes, and for a split second, he let himself imagine it, stepping in her light again, letting it take him apart, letting her see everything he'd buried. The thought sent a jolt through him, half fear, half something hotter, something he didn't want to name. Connection's a nice word for it, he said, voice rougher than he meant. Feels more like you've hot-wired my soul and taken it for a joyride. Zyra tilted her head, studying him, and the air between them thickened again, charged with that same unspoken tension. Your soul, she murmured, is louder than you know. I heard it long before you arrived. Elias blinked, caught off guard. Heard it? Well, a damn radio signal. She didn't answer right away, just drifted closer, close enough that he felt the warmth of her, or the illusion of it, brush against his chest. You called to me, she said, in your silence. That hit harder than it should have. Silence. He'd spent years drowning it out, cracking jokes with Nyx, chasing relics, running from the quiet that always brought Lyra back. He turned away, breaking her gaze, because looking at her felt like handing over pieces of himself he wasn't ready to lose. Yeah, well, he said, forcing a grin, I'm not big on silent brooding. Too much work. But the words felt hollow, and he knew she wasn't buying it. She didn't need to. She'd seen him. Every crack, every scar, every stupid hope he'd let die. And now she was offering what? More? A chance to be something beyond the drifter he'd become? He paced a few steps, boots echoing in the vast chamber, trying to shake the weight of her stare. The hum in his head didn't fade. If anything, it grew, weaving her into his thoughts like a thread he couldn't pull loose. He stopped, leaning against a crystalline panel, and let his mind drift. Lyra flashed there first, always Lyra. The way she'd laugh at his terrible pickup lines, the way her hands felt on his shoulders, the way she'd looked at him that last day, promising they'd make it through the mission. Then the explosion, the silence after the years of running. He'd built a life out of motion, out of never looking back. But Zyra, she was the opposite. She was stillness, eternity, a mirror he couldn't dodge. You're thinking of her, Zyra said, and it wasn't a question. Elias flinched, spinning to face her. Stay out of my head. He snapped, sharper than he meant. She didn't recoil. She just watched, calm and unreadable. I don't need to enter, she said. I feel it. Her echo in you. Elias dragged a hand over his face, exhaling hard. Yeah, well, echoes don't pay the bills. Or keep you warm at night. It was a cheap shot, a wall thrown up, but Zyra didn't bite. She drifted closer again, her light brushing his arm, and this time he didn't pull away. You could stay, she said, soft but firm. Here, with me, beyond echoes. The words landed like a punch, and, for a moment, he let himself picture it. Staying, letting the eclipse seeker drift off without him, diving into whatever this was, her world, her light, her everything. He could feel it already, the hum of the core filling the emptiness, her presence chasing away the ghosts. And that pull, God, that pull. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need, raw and jagged, tugging at parts of him he'd locked down tight. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the way her form shifted. Now a woman, now a dream, offering something he hadn't had in years, a place to belong. But then Lyra's face flickered again, and with it, the life he'd carved out. The seeker, Nyx's dry quips, the thrill of the chase, the chaos of it all. That was him, Elias Vorne, the guy who ran toward trouble, not away from it. Staying meant giving that up, trading it for what? Eternity with a being he couldn't even touch. Not really. He stepped back, breaking the spell, and rubbed his neck. Tempting, he said, voice steadying. Really tempting. But I'm not built for forever. I'm to me. Zyra's glow dimmed, just a fraction, and he wondered if she felt it too. The ache of almost. You could be more, she said, echoing her earlier words. But this time it sounded less like a promise and more like a plea. Elias grinned, lopsided and tired. Maybe. But I kind of like being the mess I am. Keeps things interesting. She didn't argue, just watched him, and the silence stretched, heavy with everything they weren't saying. He turned away, picking up his helmet, but her presence lingered, a warmth at his back he couldn't shake. He wasn't the same, he knew that. She'd changed him, wired him into this place, into her. But walking away, that was still his call, and he wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. Elias clutched his helmet under one arm, the weight of it grounding him as the hum of the eternal core pulsed through his veins. Zyra hovered before him, her form a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow, solid one moment, ethereal the next. The air in the chamber felt thick, charged with something heavier than energy, something that pressed against his chest and made his breath catch. She hadn't moved since he turned away, but her presence was louder than ever, a silent plea woven into the way her glow flickered, the way her eyes, those endless, burning depths, followed him. "Stay," she said, and the word wasn't just sound, it was a current, rippling through the space between them, pulling at him like the black hole outside. Her voice dropped, soft and raw, edged with a longing that hit him square in the gut. "Stay with me, Elias Vorne." She drifted closer, close enough that he felt the heat of her, or the illusion of it, brush against his skin, a tease of warmth that sent a shiver racing down his spine. Her form stabilized, sharpening into a vision of a woman, curves that begged to be traced, a face that could have launched wars, lips that shimmered like they held secrets he'd killed to taste. "Here," she whispered, "you could be more. With me, you'd never be alone." The words sank into him, deeper than they had any right to, and for a moment, he couldn't move. Her light reached out, tendrils of energy coiling around his arms, his chest, not gripping but holding, intimate, insistent, like a lover's touch he hadn't felt in years. He closed his eyes, and there it was, the promise of her. No more running, no more ghosts. Just her, her light, her eternity, filling the hollow spaces Lyra had left behind. He could feel it, the way her energy pulsed in time with his, the way she'd seen him, all of him, and still wanted him here. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and God help him, he wanted to say yes. Her hand hovered near his face, close enough that he swore he felt the air shift, warm and electric. "I've been alone too long," she said, and the crack in her voice broke something in him. You stir me, Elias. You make me feel again." Her glow flared, bathing him in a radiance that made his skin hum, and he opened his eyes to find her inches away, her gaze locked on his. The pull was unbearable now, a current dragging him under, and he could have sworn her lips parted, a silent invitation that made his blood roar. He leaned in, just a fraction, just enough, and felt her energy brush his mouth, a ghost of a kiss that lit him up from the inside. But then he stopped. Lyra's laugh echoed in his head, sharp and sudden, cutting through the haze. The eclipse seeker. Nyx's dry quips. The chaos of his life, the bar fights, the near misses, the stupid, beautiful freedom of it all. That was him. Not this. Not eternity, not stillness, no matter how much he ached for it in that moment. He pulled back, exhaling hard, and met her gaze with a lopsided grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I can't," he said, voice rough but firm. "I want to do I want to, but I'm not done being me yet." Zyra's light dimmed, a flicker of something like hurt crossing her face, or what passed for it. "You choose your chaos," she said, quiet but steady. "Over this." Elias chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess I do. Chaos is my thing. Keeps me honest." He paused, softening. "But it's not a never, Zyra. Just not now." The words hung there, a promise he didn't mean to make but couldn't take back, and he saw her glow shift, a ripple of understanding, or hope. She didn't argue, didn't press. Instead, she reached out one last time, her energy solidifying into a hand that brushed his cheek. It was cool, smooth, like polished metal kissed by frost, but it burned where it touched, a slow, aching heat that spread through him. Elias froze, breath hitching, as her fingers traced the line of his jaw, lingering at the corner of his mouth. "Then go," she whispered, her voice a caress that wrapped around his heart. "But you'll carry me with you." Her touch lingered, sensual and sad, a goodbye that felt more like a beginning. And then she pulled away, her form dissolving back into mist. Elias stood there, skin tingling where she'd been, and forced himself to turn. Each step toward the corridor was heavier than the last, her presence tugging at him like a tide he couldn't outrun. He didn't look back. He couldn't, but he felt her watching, felt the eternal core hum with her, and knew this wasn't the end. Not really. The airlock of the Eclipse Seeker hissed shut behind Elias, sealing out the eternal core with a clang that felt too final. He stumbled into the cockpit, helmet clattering to the floor, and collapsed into the pilot's chair, his hands shaking as he gripped the armrests. The ship's familiar hum greeted him, steady and mechanical, a stark contrast to the wild, living pulse he'd left behind. He stared at the view screen, where the core loomed against the black hole's silhouette, its glow fainter now, or maybe that was just his eyes playing tricks. Either way, it was still there, still her, and he couldn't shake the weight of it. Nyx flickered to life on the console, orb pulsing a cautious green. "Captain," the AI said, voice dry as ever, "you're alive." "I'd say I'm surprised, but that would imply I had faith in your survival odds." Elias smirked, leaning back and running a hand through his hair. "Nice to see you too, Nyx. Missed me?" The orb shifted to a skeptical yellow. "I missed the quiet. What happened in there? You look like you've been through a wormhole and back." Elias exhaled, long and slow. "Something like that. Let's just say I met someone who doesn't play by the usual rules." He didn't elaborate, couldn't, not yet. His skin still buzzed, her touch a phantom ache on his cheek, and when he closed his eyes, he saw her, Zyra, her light, her voice. She'd changed him. He felt it in the way the ship's systems sang to him now, a faint echo of the core's hum threading through his senses. He tapped the controls, pulling the Seeker away from the docking port, and watched the core shrink on the screen. "You're brooding," Nyx said, breaking the silence. "It's unsettling." Elias laughed, a real one this time. "Yeah, well, I've earned it. Fire up the engines, Nyx. We're out of here." The Eclipse Seeker roared to life, engines kicking against the black hole's pull as Elias guided it into the void. The eternal core lingered in the rear view, its light pulsing one last time before the black hole's horizon swallowed it whole, or seemed to. He wasn't sure anymore. Reality felt slippery after Zyra. He settled into the chair, flask in hand, and took a long swig, the burn of the liquor grounding him in a way the core never could. But even as the stars stretched out ahead, he couldn't shake her. She was in him, her hum, her warmth, her promise, and he knew it wasn't over. "She'll wait," he muttered, half to himself, half to the empty cockpit. Nyx pulsed a curious blue. "Who'll wait?" Elias grinned, cryptic and tired. "Someone who's got more time than I do." He didn't explain, just stared out at the endless dark, feeling the pull of 1,000 uncharted worlds, and one he'd left behind. He'd run for now, chase the chaos, live the life he knew. But Zyra's words echoed, "You'll carry me with you." And damn if she wasn't right. The Seeker jumped to hyperspace, stars blurring into streaks, and Elias let himself wonder, not for the first time, and not for the last, when he'd find his way back.